I hated our next film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, from start to finish, and this is not a case of my not being a big fan of nerdball Pee-wee Herman. I am a big fan of Pee-wee Herman. I laugh every time I see him on the David Letterman show. I once tried and couldn't get into one of his sold-out concerts, and I went to this movie expecting to laugh my head off. I didn't think he was funny at all in the movie. I was shocked. Here's a typically dumb moment.
I meant to do that.
Did you notice that bad cut on how quickly he flipped off the end of the bike? For me, Pee-wee's juvenile humor, I guess, works best in 7-minute bits in the Letterman show. That's the only conclusion I can draw from my negative response to this movie that just didn't make it for me.
Well, I didn't see the movie. It came out while I was on vacation. When I came back, I didn't catch up with it. But oddly enough, Gene, on the basis of that clip, I'd like to see it. I thought it was kind of funny.
On the basis of that?
On the basis of that clip, I kind of liked it.
Let me just tell you something. On the basis of that, if you think that's funny, you're going to roar with this film because...
It kind of remind me of Harold Lloyd a little bit there.
Oh, my God, Roger. You're Harold Lloyd. Don't throw big, good names.
I'll tell you what. I'll see the movie. I'll get back to you, okay?
If anybody asks you why you wanted to rent these films, say, you don't know. Don't mention our names. My first guilty pleasure is Pee-wee's Big Adventure, a movie that came out a year ago and proved that Pee-wee Herman was more than a stand-up comedian. He represented a whole self-contained worldview. In the movie, Pee-wee lives in his own little world, which looks like the world's biggest toy department. He's an eternal optimist, and usually he's right, like here, where he wins the Tour de France bike race. But then Pee-wee loses his beloved bicycle and starts on a cross-country odyssey in search of it.
And when they finally pulled the driver's body from the twisted, burning wreck, it looked like this.
I looked at Pee-wee's Big Adventure again the other night on video, and I was surprised all over again by how innocent, how playful, and how truly eccentric Pee-wee Herman really is. But the movie is not just a strange little man acting goofy. Pee-wee has created a whole fairy tale universe as consistent and fascinating as Alice's Wonderland or the world of the Hobbits and the Lord of the Rings. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is one of those movies like The Wizard of Oz, I think, that kids can look at in one state of mind while the grown-ups enjoy it on a completely different level. And I think people are doing that also with his Saturday morning TV show, too. Grown-ups are watching it.
Well, I tell you, I didn't like the picture when it came out. I have enjoyed this character when he's had short bits on TV talk shows.
Yeah.
I just saw him host a while ago the Joan Rivers show, and he was acceptable in that format, in short bits, but in a long film, I thought it was just much too much. The gimmicks that I saw, like the putting on the shoes at the beginning of the film and all that kind of stuff, his little bedroom and all that, just seemed to me too predictable. And the nya fights back and forth got to me. I can't recommend it.
I don't know. I think you kind of have to be in a certain state of mind to take Pee-wee Herman. And to be sure,
in the long...
a feature length, there's a lot of Pee-wee Herman.
Yes.
This might be one to kind of show 10 minutes of every night as a short subject.
Go to the refrigerator.
But I had a lot of fun anyway.
It's called Beetlejuice, and to its credit, it's one of the most ambitious fantasy, horror, and comedy films ever made. But here's a case where a movie just tries too hard for its own good, overwhelming us with special effects to the point it becomes almost obnoxious. Beetlejuice is the story of a young couple who has fixed up a nice country home, but they die in a car accident. And when they return home, they discover that they're ghosts. Then the home is sold to an obnoxious couple from New York City, their daughter and their lousy decorator, and the ghosts try to scare them all away, but they can't be seen.
I'm gonna get her.
What to do, how to get the new people to leave. As in Ghostbusters, they must call on outside help. In this case, a wacky alien character from the netherworld named Beetlejuice, played by Michael Keaton.
There you go. You don't have to kill anybody. Possession's good. Learn to throw your voice, fool your friends, fun and party.
A little of this guy goes a long, long way, and the back half of this movie is absolutely stuffed with his antics.
Can you be scary? What do you think of this? You like it?
There's plenty more of Beetlejuice in this movie. The film was directed by Tim Burton, the same man who directed Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and you can't fault the inventive art direction or ambition in either film. But in Beetlejuice, it's just too much of a not very good thing. I really felt the Michael Keaton character detracted from a rather nice couple played by Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin, and so the very thing that I thought I would enjoy the most, the Ghostbuster, if you will, was the thing that I enjoyed the least.
You know, I'm with you on this one, and frankly, I walked into this movie knowing nothing about it. I didn't know it was going to be a Ghostbusters clone.
Right.
And I liked that relationship between Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin. I thought it was going to be a goofy, silly comedy about this young married couple trying to fix up this crummy house. Maybe kind of a money pit or something. I don't know what I was expecting. Then when all the supernatural stuff hit, I agreed with you. I was sitting looking at the set decorations and saying, gee, that's terrific, the special effects. Boy, they're well done, but so what? Because there's no comic energy behind it, and Beetlejuice is absolutely, I mean, you use the word obnoxious. That's what it is. It's not funny. It's just, there's that guy again. Let's get rid of him, which is not what I expect to think about Michael Keaton.
No, if this were a comedy act, which is really what it is for about 40 minutes, you would walk out after 10 and say, who needs this? It's not funny. Our first film is the eagerly awaited Batman, and although it's far from perfect, it's the first summer spectacular that I've really enjoyed. I think that has to do with it not being a sequel, and also that there's some true originality in the film's art design, sound, and performances. As been reported, this is a darker Batman, not at all like the campy 60s TV show. Jack Nicholson stars as criminal Jack Napier, here out to rob a chemical factory with the police and Batman, Michael Keaton, in pursuit. Jack Napier turns into the twisted character of the Joker after Batman throws him into a vat of acid, scarring his face. Thus, natural enemies are born.
Wait till they get a load of me.
Out of uniform, Batman, of course, is millionaire Bruce Wayne, who draws the attention of photographer Vicki Vale, played by Kim Basinger. She's tipsy at the end of their first date. The three main players are brought together when the Joker tries to disfigure Vicki Vale with acid as part of his crime wave. The film plays down Batman's paraphernalia, save for the last act. A confrontation between Batman and Joker in the street and sky above Gotham City. The Batwing plane looks like a little model there, so does the Batmobile in some shots. Director Tim Burton obviously wants to recall the original comic book look as well as tell a more adult kind of story, and that adult approach is what I found so refreshing about this Batman movie. We have so many films these days that are being made for the teenage audience, films that look like overblown TV shows. Here's a picture with adult stars, troubled characters, and a dark look. It's a shame that that approach has to be considered a risk these days, but I'm certainly glad the approach was taken. I enjoyed this Batman.
You said you enjoyed it more than any of the other entertainment pictures this summer. I certainly didn't think it was as much fun as the Indiana Jones film.
More for me.
And
I felt I've been through that one before.
As I looked at it, the thing that struck me most of all was the art direction. Gotham City in this movie is one of the original places in the movies. I thought it was very well done. It reminded me of places like Metropolis in the movie by Fritz Lang, or the futuristic Los Angeles in the movie Blade Runner by Ridley Scott. So I thought that the art direction was sensational. I thought the special effects were good. I thought those buildings looked like they went up 1.5 miles into the sky. I thought the dark film noir look of the film was very nice, but I didn't care about anything that happened in the movie. I never really found that these characters became people that I could get involved with. I felt that Nicholson, as the Joker, went on way too long. He was on too often. He was doing the same thing over and over. I found the relationship between Bruce Wayne and Vicki Vale didn't work at all, Kim Basinger and Michael Keaton. In fact, when she's in the Batcave and she sees for the first time that Bruce Wayne is in fact Batman, do you remember what her reaction was? She had no reaction.
I think
they left the reaction out of the film. They didn't even care that she was surprised.
No, she knew, and I think there are indications throughout the picture that these people know who they are in other lives, in other alter egos kind of situations.
Well, I don't.
It's very true between Batman and Jack Napier at the beginning of the film. When they give each other knowing looks, they're setting up a battle for the future.
Well, Gene, the thing, whether she knew who he was or not, is part of the suspension. In these movies, all of these movies, the superhero wears a mask that covers the top half of his face. It's like RoboCop. Well, anyone can see that it's Michael Keaton, but the whole deal in the movie is that you're not supposed to notice that until the person takes off the mask and you say, oh my God, it's Bruce Wayne. So she didn't know.
That isn't the whole. That isn't the whole business of the picture. I thought that the Bruce Wayne character was a fascinating guy. Rather than playing this as a strong man. I thought it was interesting to show this guy as sort of conflicted and nervous about it, and that's why he goes into this big pose.
Well, that's a modern touch that I wasn't surprised about. I'll tell you this much about the film. It's a very, not only a dark film, which you're right about, a film noir, but also there's a great deal of hostility and anger in this film. There's a great deal of bad feeling in it, and it's not a film for children. You call it an adult film. Another way to put it is, it's not for kids. It's an extremely disturbing film.
Don't you find that? Well, wait a minute. Well, aren't you glad to be disturbed? And you know how I mean that.
I would have been glad to be disturbed by a film that made me care, that was able to not only use its special effects, but to encompass and surpass the special effects with a story. Because the one thing Spielberg knows in his special effects pictures is you've got to have strong characters and a strong story, or the special effects simply become something nice to look at.
I felt that I had entered a complete world, a psychological world, and a visual world. I bought it. The ending runs on too long. That I agree with you in story construction. It's that problem with the third act that a lot of action pictures have.
Well, I admire, as we can agree on one thing, we admire the look of the picture. Yeah. We just don't know if it. We don't know. We agree on whether it works or not.
We don't agree.
We don't agree.
I think you're off on Batman. I think you had a better time. You know, it's a smarter movie, you felt like you were being directed, didn't you?
You know, Gene, if you're so good at telling me I had a better time and what I felt and how I thought, I don't know why it's necessary for me to be here on this show.
I've thought about that, too.
Obviously, I'm wrong about my opinions, and you know exactly what I really thought. No, I'm telling you this. One of the things that movies can give us is a thing or a place or an experience we haven't had before, and I got that out of Batman.
Okay,
I love the look of Gotham City. I'm just telling you that the drama wasn't the equal of the production.
I think the look of the film is stronger, but the story is good enough.
Oh my. Don't go.
What happened to you?
Edward Scissorhands is a young man who lives in that bleak Gothic castle on top of a mountain and has scissors for hands. He's discovered there one day by the Avon lady, played by Diane Wiest in that scene, and she brings him down from the mountain to live in a suburban neighborhood that looks like it was inspired by a comic strip. The neighborhood ladies gossip about the strange new visitor in Edward Scissorhands, which is a weird fantasy by Tim Burton, the man who directed Batman.
Don't you worry, Kisses, you're going to be just fine, honey. You're going to be so pretty. Yes, you are. Eddie, is there anything you can't do? You take my very breath away, I swear. Look at this.
That little boy was manufactured by a mad scientist up in the castle, played by Vincent Price, who died before he could give him real hands. Everett is played in the film by Johnny Depp, and he falls in love with Diane Wiest's daughter, played by Winona Ryder. Sometimes it seems like she's the only person in the world capable of loving him.
Hold me.
I can't.
Edward Scissorhands is being sold as kind of an offbeat Christmas fable about getting to love people who aren't exactly like you are. But I found the movie perverse and self-indulgent, the kind of project that's supposed to appeal to kids but actually only scares and disturbs them. I wish they devoted a little more love and imagination to the screenplay of this movie, which is a real no-brainer about Winona Ryder's boyfriend developing a grudge against Edward. The movie ends with a fight to the finish where one character dies, and that's how a lot of movies end these days, not with people working out their problems or getting to know each other, but with somebody getting killed, and death is the solution. I guess it's easier to write death than dialogue, and so the new motto is, better dead than said. Edward Scissorhands left me depressed and disturbed.
It didn't leave me depressed. I didn't think that the film had a good finish to it.
No.
It sets up this guy in a fabled, interesting world, and then he comes down to this pastel suburban parody, which of course we've seen before. And I think at its best, it tries to give us a character I suppose kids can identify with, because they always think they're flawed in some way. Yeah. And so his hands represent the...
He's the outsider.
Exactly. But all right, that's all set up. It's nicely done. You marvel at the way Johnny Depp manipulates his hands, and then there's really no payoff.
No.
There's really no payoff.
Well, it's the automatic pilot payoff. You have a bad guy come in who's just hateful for the convenience of the screenplay, and he starts pushing Edward around, and then they go back up to the castle, and they have a big fight. That's just, it shows a complete lack of a desire to really work out this situation and to come up with something creative.
Yeah.
And so many movies these days, I'm serious about this, especially kids' films, are teaching kids that the movie should end with a big fight and somebody gets killed and that's the solution.
I didn't really see this as much of a kid film as you did. I mean, I felt this was made for me as much as for 10-year-olds, and I just wish that there had been a third act that was as interesting as the first two.
Fair enough. Our first movie is indeed Batman Returns, another excursion into the dark and murky world of Gotham City, where a bizarre band of characters enact their twisted destinies. This sequel once again stars Michael Keaton in the title role, and once again, Batman is more of an enigma than a leading man. Little effort is made to get behind his elaborate facade, although he's back with as many high-tech gadgets as ever. What's new this time are some fresh characters, including a romantic interest of sorts for Batman. Michelle Pfeiffer plays Catwoman.
Who are you? Who's the man behind the bat?
Also new, Danny DeVito as the Penguin, a grotty little man who was abandoned by his parents, raised in the sewers by penguins, and now wants revenge on society.
You don't really think you'll win, do you?
But the real villain this time is Tycoon Max Schreck, played by Christopher Walken as a power-hungry manipulator who wants to drain Gotham of its energy. Batman Returns was once again directed by Tim Burton, whose credits also include Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands. And Burton is one of the most interesting stylists at work in the movies today. His movies are always terrific to look at. Batman Returns is consistently fascinating as a visual experience. But it's sort of hard to care about this movie. The storyline is confusing, the characters are only sketchily developed, and it's impossible to get involved in the fantastical story. I always felt I was watching from the outside. There are some strange contradictions here. Batman is not a successful movie, but it is, visually at least, an inspired one.
Well, you know, Roger, I think that there are elements to get involved in the story. I did, and I enjoyed the picture. And the two parts that I enjoyed were the Penguin and the Catwoman characters. I think Michelle Pfeiffer is a good comedian and doing good light comedy when we see her as the office worker who's going to be turned in after she's abused into Catwoman. And then Danny DeVito, I thought was actually pretty threatening and sad as this little baby, this ill-formed baby who's abandoned. And I thought, this is what Tim Burton does. He gives us characters, including Batman himself, who all have this private pain that they then work out publicly.
Yeah, but you see, the thing is with Catwoman and with the Penguin is that they emerge, they are developed as characters, we get the backstory, and then they don't go anywhere. There is no engine pulling this train. There is no story to really get us from the beginning of this movie to the end, and instead what you have are set pieces, set design, character design, costume design, even personality design, but no narrative.
The problem in the picture, it's not a perfect picture. The problem is the Max Schreck character. Frankly, he isn't particularly interesting. And his story of what he wants to do and how these other two characters fit in, I agree with you, that isn't worked out. But the point is that in seeing the story, I just saw this as a personal story rather than an action story.
Yeah, but the thing is, maybe if the Penguin had wanted to do what it is that the Schreck character wants to do,
that would
give him some kind of an agenda.
I agree with you.
Because the problem is you have the two most interesting characters basically standing around as participants in somebody else's story.
There's no need for Max Schreck, Christopher Walken, in this picture at all.
And yet I would say, once again, Burton makes great-looking pictures.
Okay. Before Batman director Tim Burton began making feature films, before Edward Scissorhands and Beetlejuice and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Burton made a short film called Frankenweenie, which is now out on tape due to his popularity. It's a 28-minute Frankenstein parody about a little boy whose dog is hit by a car. The kid stitches his pooch together, and using a lesson learned in science class, he shoots some electricity into the canine and revives him. If you're a fan of Tim Burton's films, I think you will definitely want to rent Frankenweenie.
Consider this a vacation, Sandy. A reward. It's your turn to take it easy.
But there must be some mistake.
See that he's comfortable. Just a second, fella. Of course. That's what I'm missing. But thanks.
The Pumpkin King dreams of replacing Santa Claus in The Nightmare Before Christmas, an inventive stop-action animated film from the mind of Tim Burton, who specializes in giving us pain-tortured heroes like Edward Scissorhands and Batman himself. Here in a most original-looking world, Jack Skellington It swiped the wrong holiday emblem.
That's not Sandy Claus.
It isn't?
Who is it?
Bunny!
Later, with Santa Claus out of the way, Jack distributes the gifts his helpers have created. But these Halloweenland characters only know from pranks, so the gifts are strange, to say the least.
And what did Santa bring you, honey?
Merry Christmas! The movie sags, however, 3/4 of the way through when a bad guy named the Oogie Boogie tries to harm Santa Claus and Jack's girlfriend, a rag doll called Sally. So it's Jack to the rescue.
So long, Jack!
Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas looks unlike any movie I've ever seen, and so I applaud everyone associated with the look of this film. But the story is disappointing. It hints at a love story between Jack and Sally, but it doesn't really deliver that in any way. The Christmas material only works as bits about the bad gifts. I have the feeling a lot of kids are going to be asking at the end, what was this all about?
You know, I'm not even sure that, and I like the movie, that a lot of kids should see it. I mean, I think it's more of a movie for adults and for teenagers and older kids. And the look, I have seen a movie that looks something like this, and it's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. The art design of this film is so special.
Yes, it is.
The creatures, not just the humanoid creatures, but also the animal creatures and the fantasy creatures, are so unusual. The backgrounds, the setting, the decor, that if you just turned off the sound and just looked at what's there for an hour and 15 minutes, it's a short film.
It's a very short film.
There's a lot to look at.
I don't even know if it's that long without the credits. The credits had maybe come out. I mean, it's about 65 minutes.
It's a real special looking film.
The look is fantastic, but they didn't think out the story enough, and this is a problem Tim Burton has had with his projects before. You were not a big fan of Edward Scissorhands, I don't think.
Or Batman,
the Batman Returns.
Yeah.
He doesn't fit.
What Burton is always interested in is the same thing that here, and that is
pained
a person who wants to do well, but who is an outcast from society because of some handicap or some appearance that he has.
He just doesn't know how to put him through a good story often.
Now it's time for our video pick of the week, and my choice this week was produced by Tim Burton, the same offbeat talent who directed Ed Wood. The name of the movie is The Nightmare Before Christmas, and it tells the story of Jack Skellington, the most prominent citizen of Halloween Town, who begins to envy the neighboring citizens of Christmas Town because they get presents and have a lot more fun. The movie is made in an unusual and very effective form of animation called stop motion, in which real figures are moved very slightly between every shot to give the illusion of lifelike movement.
Reports are pouring in from all over the globe that an imposter is shamelessly impersonating Santa Claus, mocking and mangling this joyous holiday.
The Nightmare Before Christmas is our home video pick of the week. The Nightmare Before Christmas takes us to a land of holidays. Jack Skellington is the pumpkin king of Halloween. He develops a serious case of Santa envy and sets out to conquer a winter wonderland. Director Tim Burton says being raised in Southern California helped inspire the fable.
You know, the only way you experience seasons in California is like walking up and down the aisle at Thrifty's during the holidays. You know, there's the Halloween display, and you know, that's the way you get to experience fall, or you know, the Christmas display. That's how you get to experience winter.
A 1 and a 2 and a 3 and
The filmmaker admits to a ghoulish admiration for creatures of the night.
That's why I'm so fascinated by people with masks and things, and you know, that's why I love making people up in movies and stuff, because it changes people. It does something to them. You know, and watching the old monster movies too, it's like when an actor would dress as a monster, something would be released in them, and they would give a performance maybe because they were covered, that came more from the subconscious in a way. At least it's felt, you know, like Lon Chaney or Boris Karloff as Frank. Yeah, there was something that when you change people.
You know, of all the holidays we have in this country, Halloween is certainly the most bizarre. All the others are about bunnies and Santas and turkeys and firecrackers, but there's this one holiday, and it's the children. Probably after Christmas, it's the favorite holiday of the children. It involves death.
It's a funny thing, but see, that's the only, you know, in our country, it seems like America is one of the few countries that doesn't acknowledge death. I mean, I collect like these Mexican Day of the Dead things, and in mostly every other culture, death is more accepted. It's part of life. I mean, and it's much more acknowledged in a way. Here, it seems it's much more swept under the carpet, so to speak.
That's not Sandy Claus.
It isn't?
The movie utilizes stop-action animation, which simulates real motion using puppets.
They're actual puppets that have an armature, basically these little skeletons that move them. So the animators move it frame by frame to create the movement. And it's a really, you know, that's part of the reason why I love it so much. It's like really handmade. I mean, it's a really subconscious thing to me, but when I watch it, you get such an energy because it's like handmade, you know? It's like people actually moving it, you feel that energy.
I'm Roger Ebert.
Ah, yes, Plan 9 deals with the resurrection of the dead. Long-distance electrodes shot into the pineal and pituitary glands of the recent dead.
You know, maybe you guys were right. Plan 9 is a good title.
That's Johnny Depp as Ed Wood, an energetic young film director in the 1950s who stopped at nothing to create some of the worst, most laughable pictures of all time. And this movie called Ed Wood, directed by the always inventive Tim Burton, is simply marvelous. It's one of the great movies about movie making. It's in love with filmmaking and the directing impulse. I really like this picture. I think it should be required viewing in every film school in America. And why? Because it's about a guy who loves his work despite all the roadblocks put in front of him. Ed Wood is presented here as a cheerful, decent, slightly weird optimist. I love this guy. Here he is getting ready to direct one of his low-budget specials. And his fiancée, Sarah Jessica Parker, is steamed that he gave the key roles to would-be actors who gave Ed money to get the film made in the first place.
See, the usual gang of misfits and dope addicts are here.
Janet, I want you straight...
Say, who's a lug?
I want you staying away from the old Willow's place.
Why, that's Tony McCoy. He will be portraying Lieutenant Dick Craig.
Really? How much money did he put up?
None. But his dad gave me 50 grand.
Wood Production's the mark of quality.
One of the strangest things about Ed Wood, he liked to dress in women's clothing. He played a cross-dresser in his first feature film, the cult classic Glen or Glenda.
And cut! Print that, let's move on.
Don't you want a second take for protection?
What's to protect? It was perfect. Huh?
Ed Wood accepted the first take almost every time, always saying, it's perfect. He didn't have time or money to waste, and I also think he just loved making any shot.
Let's move on.
Don't you want to do another take, Ed? Looks like Big Baldy had a little trouble getting through the door.
No, it's fine. It's real. You know, in actuality, Lobo would have to struggle with that problem every day.
One of the best parts of the movie is the real-life friendship that developed between young Ed and veteran horror star Bela Lugosi, who late in his life was a drug addict rescued by Ed's undying admiration. Martin Landau is dead-on brilliant as Lugosi.
Mr. Lugosi, why are you buying a car?
I'm planning on dying soon.
No.
Yes, I'm embarking on another bus and truck tour of Dracula. 12 cities in 10 days, if that's conceivable.
Do you know that I saw you perform Dracula in Poughkeepsie in 1938?
Ed is so passionate about making movies, he'll do anything to raise funds, anything, even get his goofy troupe of misfit actors to undergo a group baptism so that some wealthy Baptists will finance Ed's science fiction opus, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Bill Murray is one of the troupe.
How do you do it? How do you get all your friends to get baptized? Just so you can make a monster movie.
It's not a monster movie. It's a supernatural thriller.
And wait till you see the loving recreation of Plan 9. Ed Wood is filmed in gorgeous black and white that is a tribute to the 50s and to the black and white movies of Ed Wood.
Mr. Wood, do you know anything about the art of film production?
Well, I like to think so.
That cardboard headstone tipped over. This graveyard is obviously phony.
Nobody will ever notice that. Filmmaking is not about the tiny details. It's about the big picture.
This film is just beautiful to look at, photographed by Stefan Zapsky. Ed Wood's movies were so bad they had to be made by a man who loved his work. They were innocent fun, and this movie called Ed Wood is a tribute to creative passion and also to friendship. I loved every single bit of it, and I hope that it will inspire people interested in making films to follow their dreams and not just view movie making as a way to make money. Congratulations all the way around on this picture. It's one of the year's very best.
Well, you know, Gene, I share your delight, and I also enjoyed every moment of this movie. You know, one of the key things in the movie, I think, is the way that Johnny Depp finds the right tone for the performance, because when I heard about this project involving this notorious cross-dresser, Ed Wood, who made these terrible films, I thought it was going to be some kind of a smarmy put-down, but actually, I didn't take into account Tim Burton, who I've met a couple times. He has a very sweet, optimistic, positive personality, and a lot of that is reflected in Johnny Depp's performance as Ed Wood. I mean, he's such a positive guy.
Yes.
You can't put him down. At one point, somebody says to him, "Are you a homosexual?" And he says, "No, I'm a cross-dresser."
Yeah.
He's just so happy to share whatever it is with whoever wants to talk to him.
A couple of stories. Once when I started as a film critic, somebody said to me, you know, there's this old story about this producer who would applaud at the end of every movie.
Yes.
Because he knew how hard it was to get any movie made.
Yes.
That's the spirit of this picture. And the other thing is, I once had George Lucas tell me, he said, you know, you can divide the directors of the world into those who like people and those who don't. It's an interesting way to think about movies. Tim Burton loves people, and he loves this character.
He loves people. He also loves monsters from outer space.
Yeah, it's a wonderful
And he
work.
loves corpses, and he loves vampires.
10 best films of 1994. Number 3 on my list is Tim Burton's loving tribute to a bad filmmaker, Ed Wood, about the now campy 50s director and cross-dresser who lived to make movies even though he wasn't very good at it, butchering sci-fi stories and psychological dramas with the same heavy hand. Here we meet Ed, cheerfully played by Johnny Depp in a wonderful performance as he directs a scene featuring a heavy from Ed's regular troupe of bad actors. Mistakes, however, don't bother Ed, who never made a shot he didn't think was perfect. Tim Burton, I think, identifies with Ed Wood's love affair with movie making. I rank Ed Wood this high on my list because more than any other film this past year, it communicates the joy of the filmmaking enterprise. It was also a tremendous amount of fun to watch.
It was a lot of fun, and it's not on my top 10, but it's in my top 22, and I liked it very much. You know, after seeing this film, I went out and looked at Plan 9 from Outer Space by the original Ed Wood, and, you know, it is a bad film. Maybe the worst ever made, as many people say, but it also does communicate a love, a real zest of filmmaking in ways that a lot better films often don't do.
This is why you and I have devoted our adult lives, all of our adult lives, to the movies, because we love movies as much as this guy, and we, in some level, we like them even when they're bad. And that's what Tim Burton has a feeling for, and that's why I want to put it this high.
Ed Wood is a great movie for anyone.
And technically,
who really loves
the cinematography, the production design.
The opening shot of the credits is a great shot. Okay.
Our first film is Mars Attacks, and it's a hit-and-miss sci-fi comedy that I'm giving a pass to because its hits are pretty funny. The premise is that Martians visit Earth, and they're not at all friendly, catching everyone by surprise, including singer Tom Jones, right in the middle of his act in a Las Vegas showroom. That's pretty funny. That attack gets the attention of the President of the United States, a fatuous phony played by Jack Nicholson, and sadly, the comedy here is not at the level of its obvious inspiration, Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove.
Little people. Why can't we all just get along?
And here's another Strangelove wannabe sequence with the President and his gung-ho army chief played by Rod Steiger. The special effects and the creatures, however, are a lot of fun in Mars Attacks. What I like about Mars Attacks is everything involving the Martians. It's very clear that director Tim Burton, who has always defended the oddballs in his movies, like Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and Ed Wood, he really likes the Martian creatures here much more than the Earthlings. He lampoons most everything on Earth, and the Martians are always portrayed as literally having a blast. I like that subversive approach, and on that basis, I enjoyed Mars Attacks.
I didn't like it at all, Gene.
At all?
Not really. The problem is that the concept, well, let's go at it two ways. First of all, the concept probably sounded funnier than it is. Oh, we'll get Jack Nicholson to be the president, and he'll play a dual role. Well, that's terrific, except he's not funny in either role, and they're not well written. In fact, none of the roles are well written. Then you have the creatures, and obviously Burton spent a lot of time on these creatures, and as a result, he leaves them on the screen too long. I mean, when one creature, little head pops and fills the inside of his space helmet with green oatmeal, that's kind of amusing. When it happens 1,000 times, it's not 1,000 times more amusing. This just drags on and on. There's no payoff. You've got to have a story. You've got to have an orientation. You've got to have material to make it fun.
I supplied the orientation. I think that's what the movie is really about. That he likes these creatures more than the creatures on Earth. But you're right that there isn't a hard-driving story here, and the Strangelove stuff really just shows you how brilliant that film was.
You know, his last movie, which was so good, was Ed Wood. And I think maybe this time he was trying to make an Ed Wood movie.
No. This is not that bad, and the creatures are a lot of fun. And there's some very funny stuff.
Ed Wood would have certainly been able to understand this film. Okay,
Yeah.
next movie. Now let's look at Sleepy Hollow, and to cut to the chase, so to speak. This is a surprisingly good movie, a thriller laced with lots of suspense and even more sly humor, as Johnny Depp creates an Ichabod Crane who is just a little bit of a coward when it comes to Headless Horseman, as indeed who would not be. The movie's been directed by Tim Burton, a master of special effects who adds to Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and Batman this creepy and atmospheric retelling of the Washington Irving classic about a headless horseman who is beheading victims in the small town of Sleepy Hollow.
How often do I have to tell you there is no horseman? There never was a horseman. There never will be a horseman.
Assigned to investigate the case using his modern methods, Ichabod travels upstate and meets with the town elders.
How much have your superiors explained to you, Constable?
Only that the three were slain in open ground, their heads found severed from their bodies.
Their heads were not found severed. Their heads were not found at all.
Christina Ricci co-stars as the daughter of the town's leading citizen who finds herself in sympathy with Ichabod.
It was your mother's.
Keep it close to your heart.
Sleepy Hollow is not just another horror movie, but a great-looking film where the visuals and the special effects all add to the atmosphere instead of simply calling attention to themselves. And the suspense grows even more effective, I think, because Ichabod Crane is not an action hero, but a cerebral type who has a lot of theories, but at one point simply locks himself in his room and pulls his covers over his head. I really had a good time at Sleepy Hollow.
I had a good time, too, initially, though, Roger. I really felt wrapped up in the suspense, and it was spooky, and it was scary, and it was gory, to say very lightly. However, about 3/4 of the way through the movie, I felt like it fell flat on its face. I didn't really feel like it was taking me any further. The suspense kind of dropped, and I found it, at that point, not very appealing.
Well, you know, the problem with all stories like this is that they have to end.
Yes.
And there has to be an explanation. And when you have a guy without a head riding around, beheading the folks in Sleepy Hollow, any explanation is going to be unsatisfactory.
And that's exactly what I felt happened. This huge suspense, this huge story, developing, all of a sudden, oh no, we have to end it. And bang, and I didn't feel that it carried through well. Although, I have to say, Johnny Depp, fabulous, and Christina Ricci was beautiful.
Yeah, they're really good together, and he does a real nice job of making Ichabod Crane not into just kind of a straight arrow hero, but a guy who has all kinds of theories and ideas, and he doesn't like to get blood on himself, and he's kind of scared of things. Also, I thought the revenge at the end that the Headless Horseman takes on the person who I will not name,
we won't name,
who steals his head.
That was wonderful irony.
Very good.
But I have to say I was disappointed, and I gave it a somewhat of a reluctant thumbs down because there were some complications in the story for me. For example, his whole past, Ichabod Crane's past, came into this story, and I thought that really muddied the story that we were focusing on, which is the Headless Horseman.
That part wasn't necessary.
Planet of the Apes isn't a remake of the 1968 sci-fi classic. It's an incredible reimagining of the story as filtered through the brilliant mind of director Tim Burton. This is one great-looking movie filled with exciting action scenes, hilarious inside jokes, and some surprisingly strong performances given the challenges of the near-camping material and the layers of makeup involved. The lead human is Mark Wahlberg as Captain Leo Davidson, whose pod crash lands in a swamp, but that's the least of his problems. Helena Bonham Carter plays Ari, a human rights activist ape whose father is a senator.
The only reason I put up with your nonsense is because of your father.
And that's Paul Giamatti, very funny as a slave trader. Six-time Academy Award-winning makeup artist Rick Baker gives each of the main ape characters a distinctive look, and the actors are uniformly superb in establishing their personalities through all that prosthetic magic. Tim Roth breathes evil life into the character of Thade, a bloodthirsty, human-hating general. Wahlberg is fine in the action scenes, but he seems a little green for this part. Somebody like a George Clooney would have given Davidson more presence. But that's really my only quibble with the film that is far and away the most entertaining of the blockbuster releases we've seen this summer. Roth and Bonham Carter are truly amazing, using their eyes and voices to convey their superior intelligence while they move about in an undeniably simian manner. There's also a nifty cameo by a legendary star. Planet of the Apes isn't just worthy of comparison to the original, I think it's better.
I don't think it's better. I don't think it's the best blockbuster this summer. I think Jurassic Park was more fun, and I really want to zero in on Mark Wahlberg and the other humans.
Okay.
I think they spent a lot of time making the apes
into interesting characters, and they succeeded. And the apes look great, and they are very convincing as characters, although Helena Bonham Carter never moves like a chimpanzee. I mean, she moves like a woman who
I don't think that's true at all.
like an ape.
When she walks into the tent to see Tim Roth's character at one point, she's
you don't see her coming around like this too much.
Well, no, she's somewhere in between that, but
she is.
It's not Bozo Circus. It's a little more developed than that.
Surly in this movie. He seems distant. He doesn't care about his fellow human beings. He can't wait to get off of that planet. He's going on with a love triangle there. He has Estella Warren and Helena Bonham Carter, both interested in him, and all he wants to do is get in his pod and go back into who knows where. I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but if I were him, I would stay on that planet because I think he has better chances there.
I would give you that. And I also just think he's kind of puny in his way. He's a little block-shaped guy.
Doesn't give you the energy and the joy and the largeness of performance that you need for the hero of this movie.
Well, I don't know if he has to have joy. I mean, he's in danger most of the time.
He never seems amazed by anything.
I still have to disagree with you when you're saying that Jurassic Park 3
is
what's a more accomplished technical piece of work? I don't think so. Not at all. Not even in the same ballpark.
Yes, it is. Okay.
It's named Big Fish, and it has a fish story, all right, along with a lot of other tall tales. It's a new film from Tim Burton, who once again creates a fanciful visual experience, even if the story seems to meander. Albert Finney stars as Edward Bloom, a blowhard who has bored his family for years with long recitations of highly dubious fables about his younger days. Now he's dying, and his son, played by Billy Crudup, would like to learn the real truth at last.
Dad, I have no idea who you are, because you've never told me a single fact.
I told you 1,000 facts. Well, it's what I do. I tell stories.
You tell lies, Dad. You tell amusing lies.
In flashbacks, Ewan McGregor plays the father as a young man, remembering the magical moment he met the woman he knew would be his wife.
They say when you meet the love of your life, time stops. And that's true.
And that's Alison Lohman. His stories are filled with unbelievable characters, including Danny DeVito as a dynamic circus owner, Steve Buscemi as a dedicated but hardly productive poet, and Helena Bonham Carter as a mysterious recluse.
I'm sorry. Have I offended you?
No. You did exactly what you promised. Came back. I was just expecting you sooner.
Watching Big Fish, I felt more affection than admiration. The tall tales spin out into Fellini-esque fantasies, and it's intriguing to see connections between characters like the old man's wife, who in youth is played by Alison Lohman, and in the present by Jessica Lange.
I was drying out.
I see. I think we ought to get you a plant, mister, so we can just spray you like a fire.
Like all of Tim Burton's movies, Big Fish is fabulous to look at. But eventually, the story seems to be spinning its heels, kicking up dust, but not getting anywhere. In a way, the movie may be autobiographical. Like his hero, Tim Burton tells great stories and embellishes them with fantastical details, but sometimes the audience wonders when he's going to get to the point. Thumbs down, but affectionately.
You know, I'm going to give it thumbs up, although I understand what you're saying. I think it could have been tightened a little bit more, but I think it's just such a visual flight of fancy. First of all, it's just an amazing-looking film. We know Tim Burton can do that. And then you've got all of these wonderful actors turning in unique performances. Albert Finney, you know, and he is a blowhard. You're right. He's the kind of guy like you're rolling your head. Billy Crudup playing his son is rolling his eyes and shaking his head going, geez, I got to hear this story again. But it's such a strong performance. Jessica Lange, who has this undying devotion to him. Danny DeVito, all these little cameos. Steve Buscemi is so funny, and I agree with what you're saying on one level. I get, you know, there's all these ingredients, and it never becomes this final dish that we can really dig into and understand what it's all about. But so much of that is so interesting that I am going to give it thumbs up.
It does finally come together, but in a way that still had me kind of scratching my head, because now that I understood the truth behind the stories, I wasn't sure that I was even now convinced.
It's okay if you're not convinced. I think that's all right. I think there's a kind of ambiguity there where you're like, well, I don't know how many of these stories are still even true, although I think it's kind of nice how they tie things up, and I don't want to give too much away there, but I think they do kind of answer the question.
Big Fish is full of fantasy and tall tales. They're the legacy of Edward Bloom, a blustering salesman facing death. Albert Finney is the old man whose braggadocio is his greatest achievement. Billy Crudup plays the impatient son who wants some morsel of truth before his father dies. Ewan McGregor plays the father as a young man, bearing an uncanny resemblance here to Finney. There are wild characters, including Danny DeVito as a circus ringmaster.
I haven't seen a customer so depressed since the elephant sat on that farmer's wife.
Tim Burton specializes in great-looking films. He made Beetlejuice and Edward Scissorhands and Ed Wood. But his problem this time is that, kind of like his hero, he gets involved in these fish tales or tall stories, and they're sort of distracting from the main line of the movie. I have a lot of affection for this film. It's great looking, but still I can only give Big Fish 2.5 stars.
I shake you warmly by the hand. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for one whole day.
A poor boy named Charlie Bucket finds one of 5 golden tickets good for admission to Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It opens next week. This is an early review.
Enjoy.
And the movie is a retelling of the classic novel and the 1971 film. The new director this time is Tim Burton, whose visual imagination fills the movie with remarkable sights, especially inside the factory. But Johnny Depp, usually such an inspired actor, does not make a compelling Willy Wonka. It's the strangest thing, but watching him, I kept thinking of Michael Jackson crossed with Carol Burnett. If Depp's Willy Wonka doesn't really work, a lot of the other elements in the movie really do. The Bucket family is so poor that all 4 grandparents live in the same bed, and David Kelly is wonderful as the feisty old Grandpa Joe. Wonka's factory is staffed by the Oompa Loompas, all played by Deep Roy, and their musical numbers are funny and entertaining and very weird.
Augustus Gloop, the great bakery nincompoop.
Charlie, played by Freddie Highmore from Finding Neverland, is a fine young man, honest and true, but the other children with golden tickets all have serious character flaws. For example, Violet, played by Anna Sophia Robb, ignores some very, very good advice.
What's happening to her nose?
Turning blue. The magical element of the 1971 movie was Gene Wilder's performance as Willy Wonka. In Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Johnny Depp deserves credit for not trying to imitate Wilder, but I don't think he creates a very charismatic or mysterious Willy Wonka. The kids are good little comic actors, and the Oompa Loompa musical numbers reminded me of the Polar Express, and I was also impressed by the wild visual inventions in Tim Burton's direction and by the imagination in the screenplay by John August, so thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up for me as well, Roger. I had some of the very same misgivings, though, about this film. First of all, it does look great. The performances that you mentioned I really liked, and I had the same reservations about Johnny Depp, who I almost always love. I thought he made some very strange choices, and from the very start, Willy Wonka is such a creepy, mean-spirited guy that, you know, before they even get into the factory, the kids and their parents would be running for the hills.
Yeah, you know, the strange thing is the first movie was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. This movie is correctly titled Charlie and the Chocolate Factory because Freddie Highmore is really the central character, and he and the people around him, the kids and his weird family, carry the movie along with the special effects.
His weird but lovable family,
yes.
you know? And that's the thing too. Some of the scenes with, you know, the early scenes almost had more magic to them than some of the admittedly beautifully designed stuff inside the factory, because it's kind of the same thing happening over and over again.
The question that you can't answer, and I don't know if I could answer it in the first movie either, is who is Willy Wonka really, and what does he do inside that factory, and does he live all by himself, and in this case, is he a man or a woman? Because he looked kind of like a woman to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's one long acid trip. There's no doubt about that.
Tim Burton's Corpse Bride.
To the newlyweds.
Here's the great thing about the musical Sweeney Todd, which took 28 bleeding years to move from Broadway to the movies. If you know the show, or if you don't, you're bound to be startled by the results. It opens next week, and this is an early review. Sweeney Todd is director Tim Burton's 6th collaboration with Johnny Depp, who stars as the demon barber of 19th century London. Shipped off to Australia on false charges, Sweeney returns to Fleet Street, and here, Helena Bonham Carter delivers some sinister news regarding Sweeney's long-lost wife and daughter.
And he's got your daughter.
So, how's the singing? It is, after all, a musical with songs by Stephen Sondheim, only the finest living veteran of his craft. Well, check out how Depp serenades his most treasured possessions.
It's not a big voice, but Depp makes it work for him and for the movie. In this scene, Sweeney goes razor to razor in a shaving contest against Sacha Baron Cohen of Borat fame.
You take the scale, you take the brains.
Now that's one of the few overtly comic sequences in a very dark musical thriller, much of which is taken up with Sweeney slitting the throats of his customers and Mrs. Lovett baking the remains right into her meat pies. You can't help but wish Bonham Carter brought a little more to the songs, but this, I think, overall is a distinctive and haunting film, Burton's best, certainly, since Ed Wood. Finally, someone has done justice to a Stephen Sondheim musical on screen.
Very well done, Michael. I agree with you. And you're right about Johnny Depp. He doesn't have a big Broadway voice, but he doesn't need it for this role, and obviously for the film. Right. And I'm sure he's going to get an Oscar nomination, and he may win for this role. Yeah. And I agree with you what you're saying about Tim Burton's direction. You know, the material's so loony and dark and strange, and the sets are gothic, and they're gorgeous, beautiful sets, I thought, that he doesn't have to do a lot of extra camera trickery.
To me, the biggest surprise was that the movie doesn't feel immense, like some sort of
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. You're right.
This thing was immense, practically an opera on stage, and actually Burton and the other collaborators have kind of brought it down so that much of the movie is really just one or two characters singing in a room, and I think that's the surprise here. Just like I Am Legend is going to surprise people, I think, with how kind of intimate a story it is really in the end. This too is kind of this weirdly intimate little music.
Even for Tim Burton and Johnny Depp, it's really dark material. And some of the blood spurting out was almost Python-esque. I mean, it's a different color than real blood they're going for. I mean, I laughed at certain points. I don't know if I was supposed to be laughing, but at the gruesomeness of it all. And I also want to mention Alan Rickman, who does a terrific job in a supporting role.
One other thing I think people are going to catch is that even though a lot of the music has been cut from the Broadway show, a lot of Sondheim's underscoring is still there, and a lot of it sounds like Bernard Herrmann stuff for Hitchcock films, for Hangover Square. And I tell you, that is a great sound on this, for the background of this picture.
Very well done.
Now, last week we told you about Alice in Wonderland, Tim Burton's wild 3D rendering of the Lewis Carroll classic. It opens nationwide this Oscar weekend, and it's a beguiling, somewhat uneven mixture of creepiness and charm, with some of Burton's trademark melancholy and a lot of his unmatched visual inventiveness.
Not all of it. Oh no, stop. No, don't do that. Hey! Oh dear.
And what is this?
Mia Wasikowska plays an almost grown-up Alice who returns to a world she had visited in childhood and encounters familiar faces like the Cheshire Cat, the Red Queen, played by Helena Bonham Carter, and, of course, the Mad Hatter, played by Johnny Depp.
What a regrettably large head you have. I should very much like to have it. I used to have the White Queen, you know. Poor dear, her head is so small.
It's tiny. It's a pimple of a head.
This movie sags a bit in the middle as it shoehorns Carroll's Wonderland into a standard fantasy franchise narrative of good and evil with the usual monsters and battles. But its dreamier moments, and also the framing story about Alice's adventures in the fanciful, real Victorian world, show Burton at his best. Weird, adventurous, and able to turn the chaos of the unconscious into vivid and surprising imagery. There's a lot to see in this movie, and you should see it.
I say see it too. I think it's probably Burton's best film in a decade, along with Sweeney Todd. I think you have a book that has been tackled, a couple of books by Lewis Carroll that they've been tackled many times over the years, and they're never fully solved because the books are so non-narrative oriented. They're much more riddle and language, obsessed.
And this moves away
from it.
I mean, and this the script of this movie does move pretty far from Lewis Carroll's story. I mean, the characters are there, the Cheshire Cat and the Red Queen and the White Queen and the Caterpillar and the March Hare and everybody. But there is what feels like a much more kind of standard fantasy, Narnia Golden Compass style battle between the good guys and the bad guys, and these sort of action sequences at the end that, for me, are the least interesting part.
No, Burton's never been very good at that kind of action anyway.
What's most interesting is the images and the characters and the world, and I think he does use 3D to sort of deepen and extend this world a little bit, and kind of enrich it.
But what you say about the casting, I think, is absolutely true with this sixth collaboration now between Depp and Burton. I mean, is Johnny Depp not the least likely character actor in the world right now?
Well, it's so funny how he's become a huge movie star on the basis of these eccentric character performances, like Jack Sparrow. But I think that his You know, with Johnny Depp, he was always so good-looking and so charismatic. He could have gone the kind of the straight down the middle movie star route, and he chose not to. And I think one of the directors who really saw his oddness and his eccentricity was Burton.
Absolutely.
In Edward Scissorhands, and then certainly in Ed Wood.
Well, that to me, that's the best. I mean, you can't. That movie compares to no other film really. Because it's one of my favorite biographies of any kind. But the work Depp is doing in Ed Wood with Burton, that is some of the wittiest.
Yes.
It is absolutely a one-joke performance, and it is so beautifully sustained. You can't believe he's pulling it off.
You're the file clerk. You're running into the next room when you bump into Janet.
Well, what is our relationship? Are we good friends, or is she just a casual acquaintance?
Dolores, I have 5 days to complete this picture. Don't get goofy on me.
And he takes the same kind of risk, doesn't quite pull off at all with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where you have an actor under a director like Burton who's encouraging him to go all the way out on the limb and create this bizarre characterization, very unsettling. And Charlie didn't work. I think the Mad Hatter works better.
I think it works with the Mad Hatter with these orange hair and that funny gap in his teeth.
It works. It doesn't dominate the film.
No, it doesn't.
No,
and you
it
wonder,
supports it.
you know, who is this guy? But that's what you should be wondering. He's a mysterious character.
That's
He's
right.
mad. He's mad as a Hatter.
That's right.